Welcome to another Straight Up Tuesday tip. I'm 𝗤𝘃𝗀𝗀𝗃. With me as always is Mark Ainley. And with us for the first time, we have Andrea Raila. I didn't know if to do Andrea or Andrea because she said it goes both ways. So I went with Andrea. So welcome to the show. How you doing?
Very good. Thanks for having me on. I've looked always forward to being on the show. I have a lot to say.
All right. Well, let's jump into it then. Yeah.
Well,
So we have 2024 taxes being reassessed here in Chicago. It's coming again. I feel like we just went through this loop. You know, this is your profession. This is what you specialize in. What are some things that our investors need to be aware of?
Well, I come from both sides. I used to work at the Cook County Board of Tax Appeals, and I was a case analyst there, decided hundreds of thousands of cases. So I went into private practice, and I can tell you, it's just as helter-skelter sometimes with these reassessment notices. In 2021, we got reassessed in Chicagoland, and it was a big, bumpy ride. But in 2024, we're going to get reassessed again, and you have got to be able to be aware of what is coming down the road with these increases. We already were hit with a COVID cut early on, where the assessor transferred 76% of all homeowners' real estate taxes onto the backs of multi-unit property owners and commercial property owners in the tune of $1.2 billion. So if you owned a 30-unit building that was valued at $2 million, and the next year it was valued at $2 million, you saw the tax bill increase by $23,000. That wasn't the tax rate, that was the COVID cut increase that made the multiplier. But the most important thing is to understand the trends that are happening in the assessment system now. Those trends are an increase in land taxes. So in 2021, when there was a cry in the Pilsen community, do you remember, in Rogers Park and Lakeview, there was a huge increase in property taxes. People didn't know, what it was justified for. It was the land values that went up. Those land values sometimes increased 120%. And now we're seeing in the suburbs, land values going up 600%, which means you have a tax on your land. Typically, it might be $6,000. Then you have a tax on your house, and that may be $12,000 if you own a large home. Now you're seeing the tax on the land being something like $12,000 and the house tax being $6,000. It's unbelievable, and that is even happening under multi-unit, 2 flats, 6 units, multi-unit properties. So we have to get a good discussion going, maybe with the assessor's office, about how does this happen? How do they assess these lands in these pockets like this? Because you can't appeal land values very effectively. You can appeal the improvement value. So this Alcott book of land values created in 1930, I don't know if they're still using that, because there's no sense to what these land values are going up in. And when you as a housing provider or a homeowner gets your reassessment notice in 2024, guess what? It doesn't show you the land values anymore. It doesn't break down land values. It gives you one value. That is not transparency. That's not good transparency. So I think we should know what our land values are and why do they pick specific neighborhoods to triple and double those values. Maybe it's to discourage, perhaps, tax appeals, because you won't win very much relief when your taxes go up that much on your land. But there's another interesting trend going on with multi-unit rental housing. The assessor is looking at them and thinking of them as condominiums. Yes, they're looking at your rent. They want your rent. But they're looking at a 6-unit building, 30-unit building. What would it be if it was a condominium? In many cases, they will value a West Side building in Garfield Park, an 89-unit walk-up. They'll say each unit can sell for $102,000. And then an identical unit next door to that, they'll say it can be sold for $90,000 per unit. And we did this analysis of this building. This is in Garfield Park, 2 identical buildings owned by the same person, and the taxes on that 89-unit building for the one is $82,000, and the other building takes in the same income, 89 units, and it's taxed at 59,000. So there's a problem there with uniformity in multi-unit properties. And we did a study showing different multi-unit properties and what are they taxed at per unit and what is their market value per unit. And I think that if you utilize that in your tax appeal arguments, you might have a very effective way to challenge your huge increase in your assessments that I'm expecting in 2024, and challenge it in a different way instead of always just, you do have to disclose your income though. But I think it's important to know that when you are a housing provider, you have an assessment that is assessed like a home. It's assessed at 10%. And if they are going after homes that are classed at 10% and increasing land values that dramatically, we have to be ahead of the game and maybe invite a discussion with the assessor's office and technicians to say, where are you going with this? Because none of the land values increased in the Loop and in the Fulton Market area, which is booming, no land value increases. But in West Chicago and the Pilsen community, 175% increases in land value.
So is there any, Andrea, for our investors out there who are looking at a property now, right? And they're saying the taxes on this thing are 15K or whatever it is there any general rule of thumb? You know, they got to, what's going to happen after the assessment, right? We're trying to underwrite deals. You know, is there any rule of thumb that you can give them of, hey, expect this, or is it just, are we at a roulette table right now?
It's really a roulette table right now, but if we look back at what happened in 2021, that kind of sets the stage of these increases of property taxes without much understanding, because a lot of times these properties don't sell necessarily for the assessor to come in at that market value. However, we also see a trend in the assessor ignoring the purchase price on the property, the arm's length sale, and valuing it. If it's sold for 1.9, he values it at 2.6. So we're concerned about that. The assessor needs to accept these sales and assess accordingly, and also utilize the income approach so that you're not just assessed based on the sale price 100%. Because, you know, as we go along, we're going to have, you know, these taxes that, I know we don't have much time to cover it, but taxes that are increased because we have this new recapture law. But I think the best thing for investors to think of is when they consider buying a property, they kind of know what those taxes should be. It should be more than, it should not be as high as 25% of your gross potential income in a multi-unit building. I think it should always be below 20%. That's the rule of thumb. But the assessor has been very aggressive in not giving those kind of breaks. But when I was at the Board of Review as a tax analyst for 8 years, we had that rule of thumb. If you saw the taxpayer coming in with a 20-unit building, 150-unit building, and the taxes were above 20%, you gave that case a double look. Because, you know, there's only so much. You get one rental dollar. Are you willing to take 25 cents, a quarter out of that rental dollar for property tax purposes? No, it shouldn't be that way. Especially if we have to say, you know, we need to say vote no for the transfer tax. That is a disastrous question on the ballot in March.
Yep. And we just had Mike last round to talk about that one as well. So going back to property taxes real quick, are there any neighborhoods you feel that are in for a bigger roller coaster than others? Like putting the crystal ball on the table here, 2024, where, you know. I
think especially in Rogers Park, because if they did that in Pilsen, you know, Rogers Park, Albany Park, I don't think Garfield Park is off the hook. Hyde Park is not off the hook. I think those are areas that are really going to get large increases, and those are not necessarily the Gold Coast, Astor Street, or, you know, some of the Wicker Park areas. Wicker Park areas already felt those massive increases in the land on their 2-flat single-family homes, units that had storefronts with apartments above. That's why we have to have a discourse with the assessor's office to say, you know, what are you planning for Chicagoland? What do we need to know that's going to go into your they call it an algorithm, 14 digits put into all these different categories of, building permits pulled, sales going on, tear downs. One of the interesting things that we noted is that when you bought a building, let's just say it's a 2-flat, you bought that building and you tore that building down and you built a new one, or you did a gut rehab, they put the value of what you bought on that property all into the land. Bought for $900,000, the land was probably, they just $900,000 for the land, and then an overall $2 million for the home, a total package like that. I think that's a trend that should stop. They should not convert these every time you tear something down, that the value in the land is that high. That's their new, I guess, 𝗬𝗏𝗃𝗏 rhythm or rhyme.
All right. So, is there any place you feel that it's, I don't want to say safe, but, a single family home is going to feel this bump? Are there certain pockets, like you mentioned, like Wicker Park, they've already kind of experienced it? Like, give us some, I'm hesitant to say good news, but who is safer?
Let me just say this. It wasn't just Wicker Park. It was Hyde Park, Wicker Park, Lakeview, Rogers Park, and Albany Park that were seeing those pockets of increase. But listen to this. It was only in specific neighborhood codes. It was almost as if he was testing what would happen if I did this. And because, it generated a lot of tax appeals, I think it was because no one sounded the alarm and put out a land study, except for us. We're going to publish a land study and bring it to the attention of the assessor. But because no one really did anything academically to challenge the policy, I think he's going to spread that land increase over. Because why did he change the tax reassessment notice? The tax reassessment notice in 2018 broke down your land building values. Land assessment, building assessment, total assessment. And then you could see from that, what was going on. That disappeared. That disappeared in 2019. And the notice only gives one value. And that's not real good because, you got to have that transparency. But, in some good news is I think that, there hasn't been a lot of sales, especially in homes. So it's going to be a little bit harder for him to come up with market values that are going to be really high because there's just not enough sales. He has to look at sales that occur in 20, 23, 22, 21, and 20. He can go back as far as, 2019, but it's usually the last 4 years. And we saw a lot of activity and big values happening in 2020, as you know. But then there's just been, the pendulum has waved back the other way. But it's just, you're kind of like at the mercy of this computer, it's called the 𝗏𝗏, computerized mass appraisal system. And, that's just data in, data out. If it's bad data, it's bad assessments. Listen, we should not be producing 23% of the appeals in the nation. The average number of appeals done in every assessment district across this nation is around 3% or 4%. Why on earth are we having 23% of our parcels being appealed on? Probably it's because we're the second highest property tax county and state in the nation, just behind New Jersey, which you can start a thriving business in there doing tax appeals. But we're over reliant on property taxes, and we've got to, we have to figure out a new way, and we have to be creative in figuring out a new way. Whether you do a graduated income tax, which was voted down by the voters when they said let's have a graduated income tax, but we've got to find out ways to cut our property tax liabilities. Part of it is getting the schools, public schools, off our tax liabilities, and that because sometimes half the bill goes into the school districts, college and elementary. But one of the worst things is having the TIF districts, because the TIF districts, for these multi-unit housing providers out in Garfield Park, they have tax bills that 70% of the tax bill pays into the TIF district. And we're talking about areas that, you know, are deserts for, you know, good food stores and safety and all kinds of things. So not having enough Walgreens, not having enough, you know, more pool halls and bars than everything else. So if you're 70% of your tax bill and your tax bill is $69,000 and that's going into a TIF fund, something's wrong with that picture.
Yeah. All right. Ton there. We're going to have you back to talk about this in more detail, especially as 2024 is around the corner here and we'll be seeing these assessments hit. But yeah, before we wrap, Mark, Chicago Fact, who are we playing for?
All right. Today we're playing for John Wolfel. So John, if I get this question right, you get a $50 card brought to you by today's sponsor, which is Raila and Associates.
All right. So Andrea's going to know this. So this is going to be a layup, I guess. But let's see if Mark can get this. So in doing our research, our guest today attended Mundelein College on the edge of Rogers Park in Edgewater. Since then, it has become absorbed or affiliated with this university. And your options are Loyola, Northwestern, DePaul, University of St. Mary.
So it's a wild guess here. I'm going to go with Loyola.
Hey, way to go. Nice work, Mark.
Yes. I mean, I knew that. I researched plenty before the show. That's what I meant to say.
I gave you 3 Catholic universities. That'd be one of them.
All right.
She already said she was 1 of 10. Like that was Northwestern's off the table.
All right, Andrew. Thank you so much for coming on, Tom. Thank you as always. Listeners, visit Build Your Team, straightupchicagoinvestor.com, where you get Raila and Associate all their information, www.taxes2high.com. I have personally been a client of Raila for, I think we're going on 14, 15 years now. I met you at a 𝗖𝗵𝗶𝗵𝗵 property management conference back in the day, and I've been a loyal client and referred a lot of people since. So check out, you get the information there for contesting taxes, or at least get some more information on what you're going to have to do here in 2024 if you own stuff in Chicago. So thank you very much for coming on. Tom, thank you. Listeners, we'll see you on Thursday.
All right.
Thanks all.